Okay, so hi everyone. My name, as Tessa mentioned, is Michael Solati. I am an Angular developer from Connecticut, and it is my goal to be able to teach you guys how to make an Angular application in 10 minutes or less. So what are we going to be trying to make? Today we are going to be making a very basic application that's just going to list off a bunch of movies and some information about these movies. So we're pretty much going to have a one-page website which is going to make a HTTP GET request to the MovieDB, their APIs, in order to be able to display our information. So what tools are we going to be using? The primary tool that we're going to be using to create this Angular application is the Angular CLI. If you haven't used it before, if you want to use it, you should be using it if you're making an Angular application. The website is cli.angular.io. The CLI makes it ridiculously easy to create Angular applications, components, directives, services, and additional modules your app might need. So you saw kind of in that top left corner, it gave you a little preview of what the CLI is like. And with these 4 lines, this is all we need to do in order to create an Angular application. Our first line is just to install the Angular CLI. Not that hard of a command. I am not going to run it. Just trust me, I already did run the command and it worked. Next command is to create an application. The ng prefix typically stands for Angular, so when you see ng, think Angular. So when we say ng new my dream app, we're telling the Angular CLI to create a new app called my dream app. And our last 2 commands are to change directories into the my dream app directory, and ng serve just serves our Angular application. So let's create our app. First command we're going to be running is ng new movies. Now, in the previous slide, you saw that it was just ng new and then the app main. Here you see that I have a few additional fields here. And these are just arguments we can pass into the CLI, telling the CLI, hey, do these things too when we create our application. The first thing we're telling the Angular CLI to do is to include a routing module. This routing module is where we can define routes for our single page application. So we just say -- routing true, and boom, the Angular CLI is going to generate a routing module so we can define our routes for our application there. Next command is style SCSS, which tells the Angular CLI that for our styling, we're going to be writing everything in Sass, so compile that Sass for us to CSS. And the last line, you see that it says prefix movies. Well, in Angular, it's a component-driven environment, so ideally, you're going to be creating a lot of your own custom component to be using. We're going to prefix all of these components that we create for our application with the term movies. That way we know that these components are components written by us. If you choose not to use the prefix movies, that's okay. The Angular CLI sets its own prefix of app if you don't. So what do we need to do? We're going to have to make a few components. We're going to have to add some tools in order to make this app kind of work and look pretty. Then we have to make it look pretty by styling and profiling our app. We're going to define some of our routing. We're going to fetch some movies from the MovieDB API, and then we're going to display these movies. So, as Emperor Palpatine said, let's do it. So I'm just going to jump into the folder that I keep all my code stuff in. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to generate a new project called movies. Routing is going to be set, our style is going to be Sass, and the prefix for our app for our components is going to be movies. I'm going to let that command run, and you can see that it's doing a bunch of things. It's creating a README, it's creating that routing module that I said that the routing flag will create. We have a component that's being a component styling that is using Sass, like I told it to use. We have HTML for our app component. We have a spec.ts, and if you haven't seen spec.ts before, that spec towards the end of it just says that this is going to be a file for writing our tests in. Then we have just our component.ts, which is the code for our actual component. And there's a slew of other little things here that the Angular CLI creates all this stuff for us, making it a little bit easier. And at the very end, it's just going to install all of the dependencies for the Angular application. Now that's that. Now that that is done, we're going to just install 3 more libraries. We're going to be installing Angular Material for our styling. Angular Material is a library of components for custom-made components by the Angular team in the style of material design. Luckily, you're going to be hearing more about that later on today. Angular CDK, dependency for the Angular material library. I don't want to dig into it. I won't fit that in 10 minutes. And normalized CSS, which, well, that's just useful. So I'm going to let those things install. And in another tab, I'm going to jump into this movies folder based on the new folder created by the Angular CLI. And we're going to start coding inside of here. So, all right. This is Visual Studio Code, where we're going to do all of our coding, and it's going to be awesome. All right, that should be readable. And other thing we're going to do is just run the command ng-serve. That way, the Angular CLI will start running our application for us. Building, 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 and we expect the CLI to run our application on localhost port 4200. So while I'm waiting for that, we're going to just create a new tab, Chrome, and jump into the localhost 4200. And boom, Angular CLI created something for us. We did little to nothing, and we're done. Okay, no, we're not done. We need to do a little bit more here. So let's get started with what needs to happen. First thing that we're going to want to do to make this application, do something kind of cool. Well, first thing we're going to do is we're going to create some components and a service. So let us open a tab and there we go. So we can do some coding in here. So if I want to create a new component, I mentioned before that ng command that I typed into the terminal is how we use Angular CLI. So we're going to say ng, saying for the Angular CLI, g to generate something new, and what we're going to want to generate is a component. So we're going to use C for the component, and we're going to create a home component. And you see it says created app home component, our Sass, our HTML, our testing file, and then the component code itself. And you see it says it's updated the app module TS. Well, I'm going to open up that source folder, go into our app. If we take a look into our app module, you can see home component's been added right there. Okay, just so you can see that again, I'm going to add one more component called movie. And you can see that the movie folder has been created by the CLI. Inside of the movie folder is some HTML, some Sass, some testing files, and our app module has been updated to import that movie component. This is doing all the work for us. It makes our lives easier so we can make dope apps. All right, the last thing we're going to need to generate in here is a service. So we're going to do ng generate service, S for service, and now you're going to notice I'm doing services / movies. Well, this service is going to be fetching data from the MovieDB for us. And it's because I want to kind of put all my services, which are what's going to be fetching and managing data for me, into one place. I'm just putting services in the front of it. And that Angular CLI is going to create a folder called services, and it's going to put the movie service inside of there. So hit the enter key. It says created the service, created the testing for the service, but service is generated but not provided. It must be provided to be used. Okay, we're going to provide that. And we're also going to be providing a few other things that our application needs in order to run. A few things that we're going to be adding is the HTTP module, which allows us to make HTTP, GET, POST, etc. requests. We're going to be importing the material module, which, well, is so we can style with Angular material. And we're going to be importing that movie service. And I'm going to declare the movie service as a provider for my Angular application. And last thing we need to do is just include our HTTP module and our material module into our app. So we're just going to include those right there. So now we have our HTTP module and our material module running. Going to click save. We're going to jump back into our app and we're going to see what's happening there. And nothing exciting yet. That's okay. We can make it do something kind of exciting. Just going to point out right now, everything is just a plain white page, which is cool, but we wanted to make it look just a little bit prettier. So what we're going to do, and this isn't quite in the 10 minutes because I kind of cheated here, but I hope you guys don't mind. I pre-created a Sass file that I'm just going to be dropping in here. And the Sass file just imports some of the styling that comes from Angular material and a few custom things that I did. And so the next thing that we're going to need to do is set up some of our routing. Like I mentioned before, the Angular CLI creates a routing module for us for our single page application, allowing us to kind of define everything we need. But you see that the routes is just empty from the very beginning. So we're going to want to declare, hey, if you can navigate to this page, go to this component. So what we're going to have to do first is we're going to have to import the components that we use for this. So the components that we're going to be using is our home component that we generated before and our movie component that we generated before. And our routes is just an array of routes. So we're going to create a new array saying that, hey, if the path is empty, navigate to the home component. If the path has it says movie and then any string, we're going to go to the movie component. And we have some redirects here in case the user goes to a route that doesn't exist in our application. All right, so that is there. So now that we have our routing configured, we're going to hopefully be able to see this work. We're going to go into our app component, our HTML code. And this is kind of what we saw before, the Angular logo and a bunch of links. We're going to remove all that stuff because we don't really need it. And we're just going to create a nav bar. And the nav bar is just going to say movies. And you see this router outlet here, these tags? Well, in our routing module, we declared the routes that our app expects. What this router outlet does is it provides the area where all of those components that we declared for our routing, those components are going to get loaded into our router outlet. And there we go. So yeah, if you guys use Angular material, check before an update that happened today. There we go. This is what we expected to see. A nav bar, movies, and you see homeworks. Well, that's the HTML for our home component. And I can show you that if I just jump into my home component's HTML, it just says homeworks. Cool. This was expected. So next thing we needed to do is we need to be able to fetch our movie data. So I'm going to go into our services, and I mentioned the service that the Angular CLI generates. Our services are what manages our data, incoming, outgoing, typically. So in our service, we're going to need a few different things. We're going to be needing our HTTP library, so we can make HTTP requests. And I'm importing something called an observable from RxJS. To keep things simple, what an observable is, it's just a data stream. And we can look and listen for changes in that data stream so our UI can reflect those changes. So we're going to create two variables. We're going to have one variable is the URL for our API request. Second variable is an observable. And this is going to be where all these movies are going. Like I said, observables are data streams, essentially. So when I make my request, I don't want to have to wait for my request per se from the MovieDB to get that information. So I'm just going to create it as an observable, and that way it'll fetch the data, and I don't have to wait for it and resolve my response. So in the constructor of our movie service, we're going to pass in the HTTP service as an argument. And what we're going to do almost immediately is we're going to call the fetch movie service, which just makes a get request to the MovieDB, and we're going to assign whatever the response is, which the response is going to be an observable, to this movies variable that we created that was already an observable. Awesome. So now that we're fetching this movie data, and trust me, we're fetching this movie data, you want to be able to see this movie data. So this service is currently not being used anywhere, and we want to be able to use this service somewhere. So we're going to go into our home component, and we're going to import that service. So we'll do import movies service from services. Service. And as I mentioned before, we're going to be wanting to we want to be able to use our movie service, so we're going to be passing it into our constructor as an argument. So we'll just do private ms for movie service, pass in our movie service. And last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a get function. And we're going to call it get movies. And what get movies is going to do, it's going to make a return from the movie service. And the movie service, we have another get function, which is going to return the movies. And if we dig into what this movies is, we'll click go to definition. You can see this movies function is just returning this movies, which is our observable that we assigned from our fetch request. Let's save that. And the last thing we need to do is we have to take the movies that we defined or that we're getting in our movies component and display them inside of the view for this. So, all right. So we're just going to be using a list, and what we're doing is ng4 let movie of movies. Well, movies is the observable that we have, which is just an array of movie objects. Let movie is we're iterating through the array, so each item inside that array list, we're going to reference it by movie. And we just have a few things here saying, hey, display the movie title, display the movie overview, and show the image. So when I click save and allow the refresh to happen, boom, everything's there. So I think you guys might not be able to see it, so let me just make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Movies, great movies. Rise of the Planet of the Apes, Spider-Man Homecoming, Dunkirk, which I've been told I need to go see. So that is everything we needed to get an Angular app up and running in 10 or so minutes, depending if we include errors. Anyway, if you guys want to see this application up and running, you can go to movies.ngpwa.com. This app is there. And in the top right corner, you'll see a GitHub icon. Click on that. You can go to the code base for this application. And I am on all of these places with that URL. So if you have any questions, I'm sure you guys can find a way to contact me. And I'll be staying here, obviously, afterwards. So guys, that is everything I have. Thank you.